Between Philosophy and Social Science, Selected Early Writings by Max Horkheimer. Quotes: Between Philosophy and Social Science, Selected Early Writings by Max Horkheimer is a collection of essays that marks the foundational period of critical theory, highlighting the author's early work on the intersections between philosophy, social science, and political economy. Written in the 1930s, these essays outline Horkheimer's vision for an interdisciplinary approach to understanding society that combines empirical social research with philosophical inquiry. His work advocates for a critical social science that addresses the realities of modern capitalist societies, examining issues such as morality, authority, ideology, and the psychological impacts of socioeconomic structures. Horkheimer critiques traditional philosophy for its abstract detachment from the lived experiences of individuals, arguing instead for a social philosophy that is historically grounded and practically engaged with the aim of social transformation. This collection reflects the intellectual climate of the early Frankfurt School, setting the stage for the development of critical theory as an emancipatory project. Quote 1. Its ultimate aim is the philosophical interpretation of the vicissitudes of human fate. The fate of humans not as mere individuals, however, but as members of a community. Social philosophy is not just concerned with individual experiences. It focuses on the collective existence of people within a community. The essence of social philosophy lies in understanding human experiences in relation to the broader societal context, encompassing institutions, culture, and communal interactions. Quote 2. But Hegel liberated this self-consciousness from the fetters of introspection and shifted the question of our essence, the question of the autonomous culture-creating subject, to the work of history in which the subject gives itself objective form. Hegel's contribution to social philosophy was in moving the focus from individual introspection to the broader historical process. He suggested that the essence of human existence is found not in isolated self-examination, but in the unfolding of history, where individuals realize their place and purpose within the societal narrative. Quote 3. The essence or substantive form of the individual manifests itself not in its personal acts, but in the life of the whole to which it belongs. Hegel argued that an individual's true nature is revealed through their participation in the larger community or society, not through their solitary actions. The individual's value and essence are tied to their involvement in the collective life, highlighting the interdependence between the personal and the societal. Quote 4. The conviction that individuals took part in the eternal life of spirit by virtue of their membership in one of the self-regulating historical unities, the dialectic of which constitutes world history, disappeared along with objective idealism. Horkheimer reflects on the decline of Hegelian thought, where the individual's connection to the universal spirit through societal participation was once a central belief. With the fall of objective idealism, the sense of individuals contributing to a grand historical narrative began to wane, leaving behind a fragmented view of human existence. Quote 5. Contemporary social philosophy, as we have seen, is in the main polemically disposed toward positivism. Horkheimer points out that modern social philosophy often opposes positivism, which focuses solely on observable facts and empirical evidence. Social philosophy strives for a deeper understanding of human culture and society, contrasting with the positivist view that reduces social phenomena to mere data points. Quote 6. The relations between natural philosophy and natural science, as a whole, and within the individual natural sciences, offer good examples of this approach. Here, Horkheimer emphasizes the need for a dialectical relationship between philosophy and science. He advocates for an approach where philosophical theory and scientific practice inform and enrich each other, similar to how natural philosophy and the natural sciences have historically developed together. Quote 7. The eradication of this difficulty in the situation of social philosophy thus appears to us to lie neither in a commitment to one of the more or less constructive interpretations of cultural life, nor in the arbitrary ordainment of a new meaning for society, the state, law, etc. Horkheimer argues that resolving the challenges faced by social philosophy cannot be achieved through adopting a fixed interpretation of culture or imposing a new societal framework. Instead, he suggests that a collaborative, multidisciplinary approach is required to address the complexities of human social life. Quote 8. Survey research has two advantages for our objectives. First, it should provide an initial stimulus to research and keep it in constant connection to real life. Second, surveys can be used to verify insights gleaned from other studies, and thus to prevent errors. Horkheimer acknowledges the value of survey research in social philosophy, highlighting its role in bridging theory with real-life experiences. Surveys not only help maintain a connection to societal realities, but also serve as a tool to validate and refine theoretical insights. Quote 9. With this approach, no yes or no answers arise to the philosophical questions. Instead, these questions themselves become integrated into the empirical research process. Their answers lie in the advance of objective knowledge, which itself affects the form of the questions. Horkheimer stresses that philosophical questions, especially in social philosophy, do not have simple binary answers. Instead, these questions evolve within the empirical research process, where objective knowledge continuously shapes and refines both the inquiries and their potential answers. Quote 10. May the guiding impulse in this institute be the indomitable will unswervingly to serve the truth. Horkheimer concludes with a call for the pursuit of truth as the central motivation of the Institute. He underscores the importance of a steadfast commitment to uncovering truth through philosophical and empirical research, regardless of the complexities and challenges faced in the field of social philosophy. Quote 11. The capacity to subject instinctual reactions to moral criticism and to change them on the basis of individual considerations could only develop with the growing differentiation of society. As society evolved, individuals gained the ability to critically examine their instincts and habitual behaviors and modify them according to personal reflections. This development is linked to the increasing complexity and differentiation within society, highlighting how moral consciousness is not a fixed trait, but rather a product of social progress. Quote 12. The idealist philosophers of the modern period did what they could to meet this need through the construction of axioms. Modern philosophers, in response to the demands of their time, tried to formulate moral guidelines that were universally applicable. By creating these axioms, they sought to provide a rational foundation for moral behavior, relying on eternal principles that could supposedly guide actions in all circumstances. Quote 13. The moral conception of the bourgeoisie found its purest expression in Kant's formulation of the categorical imperative. Kant's categorical imperative, which urges individuals to act in ways that could be universally accepted as law, represents the essence of bourgeois morality. This principle sought to establish a standard of morality that transcended personal interest, emphasizing duty and the universal applicability of moral actions. Quote 14. The individual, completely absorbed in the concern for himself and his own, does not only promote the life of the whole without clear consciousness. Rather, he affects through his labor both the welfare and the misery of others. In a bourgeois society driven by self-interest, individuals focus on their personal gains without fully understanding the broader impact of their actions. Their work contributes both to societal welfare and suffering, highlighting a disconnection between individual motives and the collective consequences of their labor. Quote 15. Materialism attempts to delineate, and not simply with the broad strokes just suggested, but with a specific focus on the distinct periods and social classes involved, the actual relationships from which the moral problem derives. Materialism seeks to uncover the concrete social and historical circumstances that shape moral issues. Instead of relying on abstract concepts, it aims to identify the underlying conditions, such as social class and historical context, that give rise to specific moral conflicts. Quote 16. Morality, therefore, is by no means simply dismissed by materialism as mere ideology in the sense of false consciousness. Horkheimer argues that materialism does not reduce morality to mere false consciousness or illusion. Rather, morality is seen as a human phenomenon deeply embedded in the fabric of bourgeois society, representing the struggle between individual and collective interests. Quote 17. The harmony of the interests of all in Kant's utopia can only be understood as a pre-stabilized harmony, as a charitable miracle. Kant's vision of a perfect society, where individual and collective interests align seamlessly, is criticized as unrealistic. Horkheimer suggests that such a harmony can only exist as a miraculous, predetermined order, rather than as a result of genuine social transformation. Quote 18. The materialist theory of society is needed in order to supersede the utopian character of the Kantian conception of a perfect constitution. Horkheimer proposes that materialist analysis is essential to move beyond Kant's idealistic vision of a perfect society. By understanding society's concrete material conditions, one can recognize that genuine social change requires a fundamental shift in economic and social structures, not merely moral idealism. Quote 19. In the future society toward which the moral consciousness aspires, the life of the whole, and of the individuals alike, is produced not merely as a natural effect, but as the consequence of rational designs that take account of the happiness of individuals in equal measure. Horkheimer envisions a society where the well-being of both individuals and the collective is consciously planned and pursued, rather than being left to chance or natural processes. This future society would prioritize rational and equitable designs to ensure the happiness of all its members. Quote 20. Kant developed the idea of a society worthy of human beings, one in which morality loses its basis, by his analysis of moral consciousness. It appears as the demand and consequence of the latter. Kant's analysis of moral consciousness led him to the concept of an ideal society where morality, as currently understood, would no longer be necessary. In such a society, the fulfillment of rationality and freedom would inherently align individual and collective interests, rendering traditional moral conflicts obsolete. Quote 21. Materialism sees in morality an expression of life of determinate individuals and seeks to understand it in terms of the conditions of its emergence and passing, not for the sake of truth in itself, but rather in connection with determinate historical forces. Materialism considers morality to be a product of specific historical and social conditions, rather than an eternal truth. It focuses on understanding morality in the context of its origins, changes, and the influence of social forces, aiming to connect it with the struggle against existing societal misery rather than abstract philosophical concepts. Quote 22. Binding moral laws do not exist. Materialism finds no transcendent authority over human beings which would distinguish between goodwill and the lust for profit, kindness and cruelty, avarice and self-sacrifice. Horkheimer argues that materialism rejects the idea of absolute moral laws imposed by a higher authority. From this perspective, distinctions between moral actions like kindness and cruelty are not dictated by any external transcendent force, but are instead shaped by human experiences, desires, and the prevailing social order. Quote 23. Moral sentiment is to be distinguished from this kind of love, and Kant is right to distinguish the former not only from egoism, but from any such inclination. Horkheimer acknowledges that moral sentiment differs from egoistic forms of love, even the kind that Kant criticized. He highlights that true moral sentiment is linked to the potential for a future society where the free development of creative powers is possible for everyone, and it stands in contrast to love shaped by possessiveness and economic concerns. Quote 24. The struggle of great economic power groups, which is played out on a world scale, is conducted amid the atrophy of kind human inclinations, the proclamation of overt and covert lies, and the development of an immeasurable hatred. In the modern era, the global conflict among powerful economic entities has led to the erosion of humanity's innate kindness. This struggle fosters deceit and widespread animosity, revealing how the pursuit of economic power negatively affects human values and interpersonal relations. Quote 25. It appears as if the world is being driven into a catastrophe, or rather, as if it already finds itself in one, which can only be compared, within known history, to the fall of antiquity. Horkheimer expresses a bleak view of the current state of society, suggesting that humanity is already amidst a catastrophe of historical proportions. This crisis results from the senseless and destructive use of humanity's potential, indicating a profound misalignment between societal conditions and human aspirations. Quote 26. Humanity has become so rich in the bourgeois period and has at its disposal such great natural and human auxiliary powers that it could exist united by worthy objectives. Despite the immense resources and technological advances available in modern society, humanity fails to use them to achieve unified, noble goals. This failure highlights a fundamental contradiction in the capitalist order, where the potential for collective progress is overshadowed by individual and economic self-interest. Quote 27. In materialist theory, the main point is not to maintain concepts unchanged, but to improve the lot of humanity. Materialism prioritizes the practical improvement of human life over the preservation of fixed philosophical ideas. Its focus lies in adapting theories and concepts to better address the changing needs and conditions of society, aiming to create a more just and equitable world. Quote 28. There is no obligation to this politics any more than there is an obligation to compassion. Obligations refer back to commands and contracts, which do not exist in this case. Horkheimer argues that the pursuit of compassionate and progressive politics does not stem from a formal obligation or command. Unlike traditional moral duties bound by laws or contracts, these pursuits arise from a deeper, more intrinsic desire to alleviate suffering and bring about social change. Quote 29. Materialism recognizes the unconditional respect for truth as a necessary if not sufficient condition of science. Materialism values truth and considers it essential for scientific inquiry, though it acknowledges that the pursuit of truth alone may not be sufficient. It recognizes that research is influenced by historical and social contexts, emphasizing the importance of critically examining how subjective interests shape scientific knowledge. Quote 30. Praxis already organizes the material of which each individual takes cognizance. The demand to establish theory-free facts is false, if this is to mean that subjective factors are not already operative in the given objective facts. Horkheimer argues that human practice and experience inherently shape the way individuals perceive and interpret reality. The notion of completely objective, theory-free facts is an illusion, as subjective perspectives and historical contexts inevitably influence even the most objective-seeming observations. Quote 31. The relationship between history and psychology has been much discussed in recent decades. Horkheimer introduces the debate on how history and psychology are interconnected. He emphasizes that understanding human history is incomplete without exploring psychological factors that shape individual and collective actions. This relationship is crucial for a comprehensive theory of history, one that accommodates the complexities of social science. Quote 32. According to Hegel, natural scientists do not merely deliver to philosophers of nature a listing of facts. Rather, they approach and anticipate the latter by way of the theoretical formulation of their knowledge. Horkheimer references Hegel's perspective on how natural scientists contribute to philosophy. Hegel believed that scientists go beyond simply collecting data. They also develop theories that help philosophers interpret reality. This interplay between empirical facts and theoretical formulation is essential for grasping deeper truths about nature and history. Quote 33. After the collapse of the Hegelian system, the liberal worldview once again assumed partial dominance. It dismissed, along with the belief in the power of an idea operating in history, the notion of overarching dynamic historical structures, and made self-interested individuals the ultimate independent units in the historical process. Horkheimer points out the shift to a liberal worldview after Hegel's system fell apart. This view focuses on individuals and their self-interest as the driving force of history, rejecting the idea of larger dynamic structures shaping historical development. The liberal perspective thus places psychology and individual motives at the center of historical explanation. Quote 34. Marx and Engels, however, took up the dialectic in a materialist sense. They remained faithful to Hegel's belief in the existence of supra-individual dynamic structures and tendencies in historical development, but rejected the belief in an independent spiritual power operating in history. Marx and Engels accepted Hegel's idea of overarching structures in history, but rejected the notion of a spiritual force guiding these structures. They proposed a materialist dialectic, where history is shaped by concrete social and economic conditions rather than abstract spiritual ideas. This view frames historical processes as products of material realities. Quote 35. The economic conception of history completes this shift from metaphysics to scientific theory. Horkheimer asserts that the materialist approach to history, rooted in economic conditions, represents a move away from metaphysical speculation toward scientific analysis. It places economic relations at the core of historical development, suggesting that changes in society stem from material forces rather than spiritual or idealist influences. Quote 36. Rather than a foundational science, psychology becomes instead an indispensable auxiliary science for history. Here, Horkheimer emphasizes that psychology is not the primary tool for understanding history, but serves as an important support. It helps explain the motivations, behaviors, and characteristics of individuals and groups within their historical context, offering insights that contribute to the broader historical narrative shaped by economic and social forces. Quote 37. The replacement of inferior modes of production by ones more differentiated and better adapted to the needs of the people as a whole represents, so to speak, the skeleton of the history that interests us. This quote highlights the economic focus of historical development. Horkheimer suggests that history is primarily shaped by the transition from less effective forms of production to more complex and socially beneficial ones. Understanding these transitions reveals the core dynamics driving historical change. Quote 38. The grounding of some psychological systems in a rationalistic utilitarianism has justifiably contributed to the mistrust with which many historians approach psychology in the first place. Horkheimer addresses historians' skepticism toward psychology, noting that some psychological theories are rooted in utilitarian ideas that reduce human behavior to self-interest. This oversimplification of human motives has led historians to question the validity of using psychology to explain the complexities of historical phenomena. Quote 39. An understanding of history, as the history of ideas, tends also to be bound up with the belief that human beings are essentially identical to that which they themselves see, feel, judge. In short, with their consciousness of themselves. Horkheimer critiques the idealist view of history that equates human nature with self-consciousness and subjective experience. He argues that this approach overlooks the broader social and economic forces that shape individuals and their actions, suggesting that history involves more than just the evolution of ideas or personal perceptions. Quote 40. The meaning of neither problems nor theories is independent of the historical situation and of the role an individual plays in it. This quote emphasizes the contextual nature of both historical problems and theories. Horkheimer suggests that understanding issues or theories requires recognizing the specific historical circumstances and social roles influencing them. Thus, historical interpretation must consider how individual positions and societal dynamics shape the development of thought. Quote 41. The discussion of Marxist theory in Germany has taken on substantial proportions in the past several decades. Horkheimer introduces the expanding debate on Marxist theory in Germany, highlighting its significant influence on contemporary social sciences. The discussion often revolves around Marx's core ideas, focusing on their application to understanding class dynamics and economic development in society. Quote 42. The aim of his theoretical work was the transformation of specific social conditions, not knowledge of a totality or of a total and absolute truth. Marx's theory was intended to bring about real change in society by addressing the conditions shaped by economic factors, rather than merely seeking abstract or universal truths. His critique was grounded in a practical effort to understand and change social realities, prioritizing action over philosophical speculation. Quote 43. According to Mannheim, the task of the sociology of knowledge is to transform the theory of ideology from the intellectual armament of a party into a sociological history of thought above parties. Mannheim suggests that sociology should move beyond partisan uses of ideology to understand how ideas and beliefs evolve within their social and historical contexts. By adopting this broader view, the sociology of knowledge aims to explore the roots and development of ideologies, analyzing them as reflections of the conditions of their time. Quote 44. The sociology of knowledge thus believes itself to be on the only plausible path to the totality. Horkheimer notes that sociology of knowledge, as envisioned by Mannheim, sees itself as the key to understanding the totality of social reality. This approach attempts to incorporate diverse perspectives and situational contexts into a cohesive understanding of human thought, moving toward a more comprehensive grasp of historical processes. Quote 45. Marx wanted to transform philosophy into positive science and praxis. The sociology of knowledge pursues an ultimately philosophical intention. While Marx sought to convert philosophical theory into practical science and action, the sociology of knowledge takes a more philosophical route. It focuses on the abstract understanding of ideas and ideologies, considering the evolution of human consciousness, rather than solely aiming for concrete social transformation. Quote 46. The total concept of ideology leaves behind isolated theories and evaluations of one's political opponents, dealing instead with their entire consciousness, including their conceptual apparatus. This perspective expands the critique of ideology beyond specific ideas or viewpoints, challenging the very structures and patterns of thought that shape people's understanding of the world. It suggests that entire worldviews, not just individual beliefs, are products of their socio-historical conditions. Quote 47. For Mannheim, the meaning to be discovered in history, which imparts to the historical and the social its impetus, is really the development of humanity. Mannheim views history as a process that reveals the essence and growth of humanity. He believes that historical events and intellectual developments reflect a deeper, evolving pattern within human nature, signifying the continuous unfolding of humanity's potential. Quote 48. The sociology of knowledge must remain arbitrary and unreliable, because the determination of what is appropriate for the time and what is obsolete is not made on the basis of an explicit scientific theory of society. Horkheimer critiques the sociology of knowledge for its lack of a concrete scientific foundation to define what constitutes relevant or outdated ideas. Without a solid theory of society to guide its judgments, the sociology of knowledge risks becoming inconsistent and subject to subjective interpretation. Quote 49. Insofar as history does not emerge from the conscious direction of human beings determining it according to a plan, it has none. Horkheimer argues that history is not guided by a predetermined purpose or plan, but is instead the result of unpredictable and conflicting social forces. This lack of conscious direction suggests that history cannot be understood as the manifestation of a unified, overarching meaning. Quote 50. Materialism is the sworn enemy of every attempt to understand reality on the basis of some idealist paradise or of any purely intellectual order. Materialism rejects idealistic or purely intellectual explanations of reality, focusing instead on tangible socio-economic conditions. It opposes theories that view history as driven by spiritual or metaphysical forces, emphasizing the concrete struggles and material factors that shape human existence. Quote 51. The conviction that each epoch in history expresses one facet of human nature, or even that history as a whole reveals this nature, stems from a point of view that is all too harmonious. Horkheimer argues that the idea of history reflecting a single consistent human nature is overly simplistic. Different historical periods exhibit diverse social groups and varying relationships, such as citizens and slaves in ancient Greece, or nobles and peasants in France. These distinctions reveal that the character of each era results from complex social tensions rather than a uniform human nature. Quote 52. The members of one class provided the foundation for the social forms just as much as did the members of any other. Horkheimer emphasizes that every social class plays a role in shaping the structures and dynamics of society. While certain cultural monuments may appear to represent specific groups, their true nature is influenced by the ongoing conflicts and interactions between different classes. Therefore, understanding societal developments requires considering contributions and tensions among all social strata. Quote 53. It is impossible to understand these cultural products without considering the dynamic of such conflicts. Cultural artifacts, like the symmetry of Greek statues, cannot be fully comprehended without acknowledging the underlying social conflicts, such as the contrast between the freedom of some and the oppressive labor faced by others. These cultural forms emerge from a complex interplay of societal forces, not from a harmonious or static expression of human nature. Quote 54. The social life process in which they emerge involves both human and suprahuman factors. Horkheimer suggests that human nature and the ideas that shape it are part of a continuous struggle involving both individual efforts and broader forces beyond human control. Human nature is not a fixed entity, but is constantly shaped by changing social conditions, and these conditions involve a dynamic relationship between society, nature, and individual experience. Quote 55. The task that Max Scheler assigned to anthropology is unrealistic. Horkheimer critiques Max Scheler's vision of anthropology, which sought to explain all human achievements, like language, conscience, and art, as natural extensions of human existence. This endeavor is deemed impossible because it assumes a fixed hierarchy of human traits, overlooking the dialectical nature of historical events where individual and group dynamics constantly influence each other. Quote 56. There is no formula that defines the relationship among individuals, society, and nature for all time. Horkheimer rejects the notion of a permanent, unchanging relationship between individuals, society, and nature. He argues that social development is not linear or one-dimensional. It varies depending on historical circumstances, meaning that attempts to establish universal principles of human nature are bound to fail. Quote 57. The role of philosophy is to give meaning and direction to this bewilderment. Philosophy, in Horkheimer's view, often tries to provide a sense of purpose and order in response to the confusion and contradictions of social life. However, rather than exposing societal contradictions and suggesting ways to overcome them, philosophy tends to obscure current needs by focusing on abstract notions of meaning. Quote 58. The meaning of human action can be interpreted on a quite general level in anthropology, for example by portraying the telos of history as itself consisting in the unfolding and development of mankind. Horkheimer points out that philosophical anthropology often seeks to find a general meaning in human actions by presenting history as the unfolding of human potential. This approach, however, is more concerned with creating a sense of security, rather than addressing the practical realities and challenges that humanity faces in the ongoing struggle for a better future. Quote 59. The reconciliation of theory with its object, which in fact constitutes intellectual progress, does not mean that knowledge and existence will ever be in accord. Horkheimer stresses that while aligning theory with reality represents progress in understanding, it does not imply that knowledge will perfectly match existence. As societal conditions and knowledge change, so too does their meaning, which makes the pursuit of an absolute, harmonious alignment between theory and existence impossible. Quote 60. The difference between anthropological philosophy and materialism has nothing to do with the principle of recognition of values and goals. The distinction between anthropological philosophy and materialism lies not in their acknowledgement of values, but in how these values function within their thinking. While metaphysical anthropology derives ideals from values, materialism sees action as emerging from human needs and desires without requiring an eternal justification. Quote 61. The philosophic thought of recent decades, shot through with contradictions, has also been divided on the problem of truth. Horkheimer begins by acknowledging the ongoing debate within philosophy about the nature of truth. The disagreement centers on whether truth is absolute or relative. Some view truth as limited, subject to change over time, and influenced by individual and societal perceptions. Others cling to rigid absolutes, revealing a tension between skepticism and dogmatic belief in contemporary thought. Quote 62. Perception is shaped not only by the object, but by the individual and generic characteristics of human beings. Horkheimer emphasizes that human perception is not solely defined by the objective reality of what is observed. Instead, it is deeply influenced by individual experiences and inherent human characteristics. This subjectivity leads to different interpretations of truth, highlighting the complexity of fully understanding the world as it is. Quote 63. The doctrine of a solid res cogitans, a self-contained ego independent of the body, which serves as an absolute resolution of the attempt at doubt and is preserved immutable in the metaphysics of Descartes and his idealistic successors, reveals itself as an illusion. Here, Horkheimer critiques Descartes' concept of the self-contained mind as an absolute, unchanging entity. He suggests that this idea reflects the bourgeois individual's experience rather than an objective truth. It shows how philosophical notions can be shaped by social conditions and personal perspectives rather than by an independent reality. Quote 64. In the latest phase of transcendental philosophy, this subjective relativism is clearly formulated. In the last analysis, all being is relative, and is nevertheless relative in some customary sense to the transcendental subjectivity. Horkheimer points out how modern transcendental philosophy embodies a form of relativism. It argues that all existence is relative and depends on individual subjectivity. This view contrasts with earlier beliefs in absolute truths, indicating a philosophical shift toward recognizing the limitations and context dependency of human understanding. Quote 65. The theoretical philosophy itself assumes that there is absolute knowledge, independent of any sensory experience, and indeed, that this alone deserves the name of truth. Horkheimer explains how certain philosophies, particularly Kant's, hold on to the idea of absolute knowledge existing beyond human experience. This absolute truth is seen as superior to empirical knowledge, showing a philosophical divide between those who believe in immutable truths and those who view truth as dynamic and contextual. Hegel, quote 66, does not end up with the bare assurance that all definite knowledge is transitory and unreal. The whole is not something distinct from the parts in its determinate structure, but is the entire pattern of thought, which at a given time embraces in itself all limited conceptions in the consciousness of their limitation. Horkheimer describes Hegel's view of truth as a holistic process. For Hegel, truth truth is not a fixed entity, but a dynamic totality that includes all partial perspectives, acknowledging their limitations. This approach suggests that understanding reality requires considering the interplay of various ideas within a broader historical and social context. Quote 67. In materialism, dialectic is not regarded as a closed system. Understanding that the prevalent circumstances are conditioned and transitory is not here immediately equated with transcending them and canceling them out. Horkheimer differentiates materialist dialectic from idealist philosophy, arguing that materialism does not view the world as a completed, fixed system. Instead, it recognizes that circumstances are always changing and conditioned by historical and social factors. This openness allows for the continuous evolution of knowledge, rather than its eternal finalization. Quote 68. An isolated and conclusive theory of reality is completely unthinkable. Horkheimer asserts that reality cannot be fully captured by any single, definitive theory. He emphasizes the constant transformation of both the knower and the known, suggesting that knowledge is always partial and contingent upon the historical and social conditions of the time. This challenges any attempt to establish a final, absolute understanding of reality. Quote 69. Freed from idealistic illusion, dialectic overcomes the contradiction between relativism and dogmatism. Horkheimer suggests that a dialectical approach, which is not bound by idealistic beliefs, can navigate between the extremes of relativism and dogmatism. By acknowledging the ever-changing nature of reality and knowledge, dialectic allows for the continuous refinement of ideas without asserting them as absolute or entirely subjective. Quote 70. Truth is decided not by individuals' beliefs and opinions, not by the subject in itself, but by the relation of the propositions to reality. Horkheimer emphasizes that truth is not determined by personal beliefs or opinions, but by how propositions correspond to objective reality. This means that truth has an external criterion, its alignment with the world as it exists, rather than being solely a matter of subjective perspective or group consensus. Quote 71. Pragmatism overlooks the fact that the same theory can be an annihilating force for other interests in the degree to which it heightens the activity of the progressive forces and makes it more effective. Horkheimer criticizes pragmatism for failing to recognize how a theory, while advancing certain progressive forces, can simultaneously threaten other established interests. Pragmatism's focus on practical outcomes tends to ignore the disruptive power of new ideas, which may challenge existing social structures and provoke opposition from those who benefit from the status quo. Quote 72. Separated from a particular theory of society as a whole, every theory of cognition remains formalistic and abstract. Horkheimer argues that theories of knowledge, if detached from a comprehensive understanding of society, become merely abstract and lack substantive content. He emphasizes that to grasp the nature of truth and knowledge, one must consider them within the context of social structures and historical conditions, rather than as isolated, purely formal constructs. Quote 73. The dialectical proposition is valid here too that every concept possesses real validity only as a part of the theoretical whole, and arrives at its real significance only when, by its interconnection with other concepts, a theoretical unity has been reached, and its role in this is known. Horkheimer asserts that the meaning and validity of any concept emerge from its integration within a larger theoretical framework. A concept's true significance can only be understood through its relationships with other concepts, revealing how individual elements contribute to an overarching unity of thought. Quote 74. The truth is a moment of correct practice, but whoever identifies it directly with success passes over history and makes himself an apologist for the reality dominant at any given time. Here, Horkheimer emphasizes that truth involves not just success, but the alignment with just and effective practices. Simply equating truth with success overlooks historical processes and risks endorsing prevailing power structures, rather than critically assessing the deeper realities and contradictions of the social order. Quote 75. The resolution of contradictions in subjective thought and the overcoming of objective antagonisms can be closely intertwined, but they are in no way identical. Horkheimer distinguishes between resolving contradictions within thought and addressing real-world conflicts. While theoretical clarity can influence social change, it does not automatically result in overcoming material struggles. The complexities of societal transformation require more than just intellectual efforts. They involve tangible actions within the historical process. Quote 76. Traditional logic has nothing to do with the alteration of the map and the construction of new systems of classification. Horkheimer criticizes traditional logic for being static and unable to adapt to the evolving nature of reality. Traditional logic focuses on organizing existing knowledge, but fails to address the need for reclassification and reinterpretation as social and historical conditions change, highlighting its limitations in grasping the fluidity of human experience. Quote 77. Categories such as history, society, progress, science, and so on experience a change of function in the course of time. Horkheimer explains that fundamental concepts like history, society, and science are not fixed. Their meanings evolve over time. As societal conditions change, so do the roles and interpretations of these categories, indicating that knowledge must be dynamic and responsive to historical developments. Quote 78. Nietzsche said that a great truth wants to be criticized, not worshipped. This is valid for truth in general. Horkheimer quotes Nietzsche to illustrate that truth thrives on critical examination rather than blind acceptance. By advocating for continual questioning, Horkheimer implies that truth is not an eternal, unchanging entity, but a process that involves persistent inquiry and challenge, preventing it from becoming dogmatic or stagnant. Quote 79. Religion was so robbed of any clear and definite content, formalized, adapted, spiritualized, relegated to the innermost subjectivity, that it was compatible with every activity and every public practice that existed in this atheistic reality. Horkheimer observes that religion has been stripped of its concrete principles and redefined as a purely subjective, internal matter. This transformation has allowed religion to coexist with the contradictions of modern, secular life, revealing how its essence has been diluted to fit within the prevailing social order. Quote 80. It is a utopian illusion to expect that the strength to live with the sober truth will become general until the causes of untruth are removed. Horkheimer asserts that genuine acceptance of truth is unattainable as long as the root causes of falsehoods persist in society. Until the social conditions that perpetuate illusions and misconceptions are addressed, the desire for widespread truthfulness remains an unrealistic ideal. Quote 81. Rationalism appeared here more in its original connection with the first phase of the bourgeois era, the absolutist regime, and came into conflict with the second, liberal phase. Horkheimer discusses how rationalism was originally linked to the early bourgeois era and the absolutist regimes of that time. However, as society transitioned into a more liberal phase, rationalism began to face resistance. This shift reflects the changing dynamics of society, where the rationalist focus on order and control clashed with emerging liberal values advocating for individual freedom and more flexible social structures. Quote 82. The philosophical opponents of rationalism have not attacked its foundations. The well-known objections of the English empiricists to continental rationalism were almost all directed toward its underestimation of the facts of experience in favor of conceptual construction. Horkheimer points out that critics of rationalism, such as English empiricists, did not challenge its core principles. Instead, they criticized rationalism for prioritizing abstract conceptual thinking over empirical experience. This distinction highlights the ongoing debate between those who emphasize the importance of sensory experiences in understanding reality and those who rely on pure, logical thought. Quote 83. Both hold that we must subject ourselves to the business of metaphysics in order to live at ease ever after. Horkheimer describes how both rationalism and empiricism ultimately submit to metaphysical thinking. By accepting the need for metaphysical frameworks, they seek to provide individuals with a sense of ease and certainty about their existence. This desire for comfort underscores the human inclination toward fixed, overarching truths, even when faced with the complexities of reality. Quote 84. In both philosophical approaches, truth consists in judgments whose concepts are related to individual sense data as the general is to the particular. Horkheimer asserts that both rationalist and empiricist philosophies define truth in terms of the relationship between general concepts and individual sensory data. Rationalists view these concepts as inherent in reason, while empiricists believe they arise from sensory experiences. Despite their differences, both approaches attempt to frame truth within a structure that connects the universal with the specific. Quote 85. The rejection of rationalism that has steadily risen in the last decades, and that seems already to have passed its zenith, reflects the history of the transition from the liberal to the monopoly capitalist period of the bourgeois order. Horkheimer links the decline of rationalism to the shift from a liberal to a monopoly capitalist society. This transition indicates that changes in economic structures influence philosophical trends. As the bourgeoisie moved toward a more monopolistic form of capitalism, the ideals of rationalism lost their appeal, giving rise to other forms of thought that better suited the new economic reality. Quote 86. In reality, reason is capable only of destroying falsehood. Horkheimer emphasizes that reason's true power lies in its ability to dismantle illusions and misconceptions. While reason alone may not construct absolute truths, it can effectively identify and challenge falsehoods that obscure a more accurate understanding of reality. This critical function of reason plays a vital role in questioning established beliefs and promoting intellectual progress. Quote 87. The dialectical method is the quintessence of all intellectual tools for making fruitful the abstract elements derived from the analytic understanding for the representation of the living object. Horkheimer views the dialectical method as essential for synthesizing abstract analytical elements into a coherent representation of reality. Unlike purely analytical or empirical approaches, dialectics enables the integration of diverse aspects of an object, acknowledging its dynamic and multifaceted nature. This method underscores the complexity of comprehending living processes, which cannot be reduced to isolated abstractions. Quote 88. The materialist cannot have faith in such certainty. There is no conclusive image of reality, either in essence or in appearance. Horkheimer states that materialism rejects the idea of a definitive or absolute understanding of reality. Materialists recognize that knowledge is always subject to historical and social conditions, preventing any claim of complete or final truth. This perspective challenges idealist philosophies that seek to capture reality in fixed, eternal forms, advocating instead for an ongoing critical engagement with the world. Quote 89. According to materialism, therefore, the theory of the social life process is on the one hand the most comprehensive mental construction to which analytic research in all areas contributes. On the other hand, this theory is necessarily aimed at the intellectual and material situation and the impulses deriving from it that are characteristic for one of the various social classes. Materialism approaches the theory of social life as a comprehensive framework that draws upon various analytic disciplines. However, this theory is always rooted in the intellectual and material context of a particular social class, shaped by its distinct circumstances and impulses. Therefore, the production of knowledge is closely tied to the conditions and struggles of the social group it represents. Quote 90. The value of a theory is decided by its connection to the tasks that have been taken in hand by the most progressive social forces in a given historical moment. And a theory is valuable not for the whole of humanity directly, but only for the group with an interest in those tasks. Horkheimer argues that the worth of a theory is determined by its relevance to the most advanced social forces at a particular historical time. Rather than being universally applicable to all humanity, the value of a theory lies in its utility to the social group engaged in the progressive struggle of the era. The alignment of a theory with the needs and tasks of that group defines its significance. Quote 91. Utility is by no means the criterion of knowledge, as the pragmatists would have it. Knowledge in the various realms of science and life can be distinguished in many ways. Horkheimer rejects the pragmatist view that utility is the sole measure of knowledge. He stresses that knowledge extends beyond practical usefulness and serves different purposes across various disciplines. While utility may be one aspect of knowledge, it does not encompass the entirety of what knowledge aims to achieve, including truth, understanding, and broader social relevance. Quote 92. The correspondence between judgment and the true facts of the matter is never given directly. There is no identity between the two. Horkheimer emphasizes that judgment and objective truth are not directly aligned. There is always a mediated relationship between what people judge to be true and the actual facts of the matter. And this mediation arises from historical, social, and subjective influences. Truth is thus not something directly grasped, but is subject to interpretation and context. Quote 93. Theory is thus not a fact of nature separable from human beings. One cannot reflect upon oneself, or indeed upon humanity, as if one were a subject freed of definite historical conditions. Horkheimer points out that theories are intrinsically linked to human beings and their historical context. It is impossible to reflect on oneself or humanity without considering the historical and social conditions that influence such reflection. Theorizing is not an independent or neutral act, but one deeply connected to its temporal and social environment. Quote 94. The socially conditioned differences are great enough. In contemporary irrationalism, these differences are mystified as natural and God-given, just as they were during the time of slavery. In the liberal period, they were dogmatically denied. Horkheimer critiques contemporary irrationalism for mystifying social differences as natural or divinely ordained, similar to how inequalities were justified during the time of slavery. In contrast, during the liberal era, these differences were dogmatically denied, suggesting that neither approach adequately addresses the social roots of inequality, each serving to uphold a particular social order. Quote 95. The striving for mere self-preservation, the purely egoistic aim next to which other instinctual impulses pale, typifies today's miserable life. Horkheimer laments that modern life is characterized by an overwhelming focus on self-preservation and egoistic motives, to the detriment of other human instincts and capacities. This reduction of human life to the pursuit of individual advantage reflects a broader social misery and alienation inherent in contemporary society, driven by the current economic system. Quote 96. The rational concept of community rests on the recognition of common life interests. These interests bind together those dominated groups who, as a consequence of the contemporary social order, must injure each other in peace and destroy each other in war. Horkheimer describes a rational view of community as one based on shared life interests. Such a community would unite oppressed groups who, under the current social order, are forced into conflict both in times of peace and war. Recognizing common interests becomes a way to overcome divisions fostered by economic and social pressures that drive individuals to act against one another. Quote 97. Materialism supports neither side in the controversy between rationalism and irrationalism. Materialism stands apart from both rationalism and irrationalism, criticizing the former for its abstraction and the latter for its blind affirmation of existing power structures. Instead of siding with either, materialism seeks to ground its critique in the social and economic conditions of human existence, offering an analysis that transcends the limitations of both philosophical approaches. Quote 98. In the liberal period, and certainly in that following it as well, society and its institutions, the whole of cultural life, were only apparently governed by human beings. Horkheimer argues that despite the appearance of human control over society and its institutions during the liberal period and beyond, the true determinants of social life are economic forces that operate beyond conscious human control. This lack of genuine control means that social life remains governed by blind forces, leaving individuals as passive subjects to these broader economic dynamics. Quote 99. Montaigne must be considered the founder of modern skepticism. Montaigne is credited with establishing the foundations of modern skepticism during a time of intense social and political upheaval. His approach involved questioning absolute truths and embracing uncertainty, particularly in an era marked by the rise of absolutism and economic turmoil. Unlike those who sought refuge in religious or metaphysical certainties, Montaigne adopted a more introspective and practical stance toward the changing world around him. Quote 100. In the face of the horrors of the transition to modernity, Montaigne flees no more than the ancient skeptics into a strong faith. He scorns the illusion of unconditional certainty. Montaigne, much like the ancient skeptics, did not turn to rigid faith amid the turbulent changes of his time. Instead, he rejected the notion of absolute certainty, recognizing that various beliefs and systems are often rooted in societal norms rather than objective truths. This perspective allowed him to navigate the complexities of his era with a critical yet balanced outlook. Quote 101. The wise person sees the mass of unconditionally certain judgments, the one overthrowing the other, and smiles. Montaigne believed that wisdom lies in acknowledging the transient nature of seemingly absolute judgments. He observed that each belief or doctrine often claims certainty, only to be later contradicted by another. The wise, therefore, maintain a sense of detachment and skepticism, recognizing the cyclical nature of human thought and the limitations of claiming definitive knowledge. Quote 102. Philosophical skepticism is the exact opposite of destruction, which it occasionally appears to be to its adherents and opponents. It is, in essence, conservative. Horkheimer describes skepticism not as a force of chaos or nihilism, but as fundamentally conservative. Skepticism seeks to preserve a sense of order and tradition by questioning radical ideas and resisting utopian schemes. It favors stability and moderation over the unbridled pursuit of change, thus serving as a counterbalance to the more destructive elements in society. Quote 103. In modern skepticism, both diversion and a relationless and comfortably appointed interiority arise from stoical indifference. In Horkheimer's view, modern skepticism leads to a form of detachment where individuals seek comfort in inward reflection and leisurely activities. This indifference is akin to Stoic philosophy, wherein personal contentment is achieved through emotional detachment from the world's turmoil. For Montaigne, this attitude manifests as a retreat into one's private sphere, where one can find solace amidst the uncertainties of external events. Quote 104. The gospel is thus the negation of skepticism, according to which action is a matter of taste or a question of individual cleverness. Horkheimer contrasts skepticism with the moral imperatives of the gospel. Skepticism treats human action as a subjective choice, driven by personal taste and intelligence. In contrast, the gospel offers a framework of moral absolutes that challenge the skeptic's relativistic view. The implication is that skepticism lacks the sense of duty or transcendental purpose that religious morality provides. Quote 105. The philosophical thought of the liberal bourgeois does not go to the root of social matters. Horkheimer argues that the philosophy of the liberal bourgeoisie tends to avoid deeper social issues, focusing instead on more abstract or superficial aspects. This avoidance is linked to the philosophical detachment from real economic and social struggles, serving to maintain the status quo rather than challenging the underlying structures of society. Quote 106. Labor and economic gain as the content and aim of existence have become flesh and blood among the members of the bourgeoisie and large parts of the dominated strata. This quote emphasizes how labor and the pursuit of economic gain have become ingrained in both the bourgeoisie and the working classes. The fixation on economic activity as the primary purpose of life reveals the extent to which capitalist values have penetrated everyday consciousness, shaping individuals' perceptions of their own existence. Quote 107. The freedom of the others consists in their ability to buy. Horkheimer criticizes the capitalist notion of freedom, suggesting that in this system, freedom is reduced to one's capacity to purchase goods. Rather than being a universal right or condition, freedom is confined to the marketplace, where an individual's value and autonomy are measured by their economic power and consumption. Quote 108. Human life has no value in this system. It acquires value only to the degree that it is inserted in the economic dynamic. In a capitalist society, the intrinsic worth of human life is disregarded, and individuals are valued only insofar as they contribute to the economic process. This perspective dehumanizes people, treating them as mere components within an economy that prioritizes profit and production over human welfare and dignity. Quote 109. The skeptical ego creates not so much definite ideas as doubt about its essence, which it takes to be its element. Horkheimer describes the skeptical mindset as one that generates uncertainty rather than definitive concepts. The skeptical individual focuses on questioning the nature of existence, viewing doubt as a fundamental part of their identity. This outlook, however, often leads to a retreat from active engagement with the social world. Quote 110. The peace that the liberal skeptic today concludes with the authoritarian order expresses not humane praxis, but its renunciation. Here, Horkheimer points out that contemporary skeptics often acquiesce to authoritarian regimes, mistaking this compliance for a form of peaceful neutrality. This behavior represents a departure from true humanist practice, revealing a resignation to power rather than an active pursuit of justice and freedom. Quote 111. The skeptical attitude, together with its tolerance, subjectivism, and liberalism, bears a harsh, misanthropic quality. Horkheimer critiques modern skepticism for its underlying negativity toward humanity. While appearing tolerant and liberal, this skeptical stance actually fosters a kind of indifference or disdain for collective social action, thereby reinforcing the existing conditions of inequality and injustice. Quote 112. Skepticism transcends itself in this respect. Where happiness is made into a principle, revolutionary action is required. Horkheimer suggests that skepticism, when pushed to its limits, can evolve into a drive for revolutionary change. Recognizing that genuine happiness cannot be achieved within the current social order compels a transition from passive doubt to active efforts, aimed at transforming society to realize human potential. Quote 113. In the struggle for a society without classes, which has been on the historical agenda since the middle of the 19th century, the masses must first organize themselves from a mere material into a subject. Horkheimer argues that the masses, in their quest for a classless society, must move beyond being mere objects within the capitalist system. They must become self-aware and actively shape their own destiny, transforming from a passive, manipulated force into an organized, conscious subject capable of enacting historical change. Quote 114. The degradation of the individual, the taboo on the display, not to mention the practice of decisive instinctual impulses, the prohibition on enjoyment, the continuous anxiety about defeat in the competitive struggle and the false ambition that goes along with it. These psychological influences deform the individual every bit as much as the direct material damage to the senses due to hunger, sickness, and hard work. Horkheimer describes how the social and economic pressures within society not only lead to physical suffering, but also psychological distortion. The individual's natural instincts are repressed, and the constant fear of failure in a competitive world creates a false sense of ambition. This internal conflict, driven by societal norms and economic imperatives, results in a form of self-alienation, highlighting the deep psychological toll that the existing social order inflicts on people. Quote 115. Ideology and utopia are to be understood as orientations of social groups that are derivative of the whole of social reality. Horkheimer suggests that ideologies and utopian visions are not mere abstract ideas, but reflect the underlying conditions and orientations of specific social groups. They arise from the complex interplay of historical and social forces, serving as expressions of the aspirations, needs, and contradictions of society at large. Therefore, both ideology and utopia must be analyzed in the context of the social dynamics that give rise to them. Quote 116. Machiavelli wants the rulers from now on consciously to make use of the means that up to now had frequently been applied only instinctively. Horkheimer explains that Machiavelli advocated for rulers to employ conscious strategies of power, instead of relying solely on instinctual or traditional methods. By systematizing the use of power, Machiavelli aimed to create a more effective and stable political order. This approach reflects the shift towards a rational, calculated exercise of authority in the emerging bourgeois society of his time. Quote 117. The law-like dependence of cultural spheres upon the course of development of humanity as a whole was the main theme of Vico's new science. Horkheimer points out that Vico's work focuses on the idea that cultural forms and social institutions are intrinsically linked to the overall trajectory of human development. Vico treated mythology and other cultural aspects as reflections of political and social relationships. This perspective emphasizes that culture evolves in response to changes in the broader historical and social processes. Quote 118. Machiavelli believed that he is happy whose mode of procedure accords with the needs of the times, and similarly, he is unfortunate whose mode of procedure is opposed to the times. Horkheimer cites Machiavelli's view that success and happiness are tied to one's ability to act in accordance with the prevailing conditions of their era. Those who align their actions with the spirit of the times can navigate societal changes effectively, while those who resist these shifts are likely to face misfortune. This underscores the importance of understanding and adapting to historical context in both personal and political life. Quote 119. A philosophical anthropology, i.e., a doctrine of a particular human nature that consists of definitive pronouncements about some immutable concept of human essence that is untouched by history, is thus impossible. Horkheimer argues that it is futile to define a fixed, unchanging essence of human nature. Human characteristics and behaviors are not static. They evolve with historical and social transformations. Any attempt to formulate a permanent concept of human nature fails to account for the ways in which individuals are shaped by their historical and cultural contexts. Quote 120. The basis of all human relations, i.e., the way in which people sustain their lives, is subject to a process of change, which provides the impetus to transformations in the spiritual and intellectual realms, hence in science, art, metaphysics, and religion. Horkheimer asserts that the fundamental ways in which people interact and sustain themselves are continually changing. These shifts in material conditions drive changes in the spiritual, intellectual, and cultural aspects of society. Therefore, advancements in various domains, such as science, art, and religion, are closely linked to the evolving modes of human existence. Quote 121. Machiavelli's error does not simply consist in his assertion of uniformities of character shared by all who have emerged in the course of history, but rather in his neglect of the social conditions underlying the preservation or transformation of psychological traits. Horkheimer criticizes Machiavelli for overlooking how social conditions shape and alter human psychology. While Machiavelli recognized certain patterns in human behavior, he failed to acknowledge that these traits are not fixed, but are influenced by the social environment. This oversight leads to a distorted understanding of human nature and its role in history. Quote 122. All social changes in the various spheres of the state, politics, religion, ethics, and law are to be explained on the basis of the notion of the isolated individual. Horkheimer highlights Hobbes's approach, which emphasizes that societal changes can be understood by examining individuals in isolation. Hobbes analogizes society to a machine made up of individual parts, where the behavior of the whole is determined by the nature of its smallest components, human beings. This view underscores the belief that the dynamics of larger social structures are fundamentally rooted in the actions and properties of individuals, perceived as eternal and unchanging. Quote 123. The metaphysical freedom of the will rejected by Hobbes would be an element which would unite people from all stations in life without exception, rich and poor, infirm and robust, young and old. Horkheimer explains that Hobbes dismisses the idea of metaphysical free will, which posits that every person, regardless of their social or physical condition, possesses an inherent freedom. For Hobbes, freedom is not a universal metaphysical quality, but a matter of the capacity to act without hindrance. This stance implies that the differences in freedom arise from one's circumstances and class position, thus reflecting the inherent inequalities within society. Quote 124. Hobbes's understanding of the bourgeois doctrine that the welfare of the state must be the highest law, and in general the sense in which the doctrine was understood by many of its earlier advocates, has since been greatly modified by modern developments. Horkheimer notes that Hobbes viewed the state's welfare as paramount, arguing that the state's interests should be prioritized to ensure the well-being of individuals. However, this principle has transformed over time. In the modern era, the state often demands individual sacrifices for the sake of its own perpetuation, diverging from Hobbes's original vision, where the state's role was to enhance the prosperity of its citizens. Quote 125. The idea, then, was similarly to abstract from the social relations of individuals, such that the state could be seen to have emerged out of a set of relations within which the isolated individual was the basic unit. Horkheimer reflects on Hobbes's theory that the state originates from the actions of isolated individuals in a state of nature. By abstracting from the social relationships of individuals, Hobbes suggests that the formation of the state is rooted in the inherent qualities and actions of these individuals, rather than in pre-existing social structures. This perspective places the isolated individual at the center of historical and political development. Quote 126. The vitalistic romantic claim that, in nature, the biologically superior will always triumph over the inferior is wrong. Horkheimer critiques the romantic notion that natural selection inevitably leads to the triumph of the strongest. He argues that in Hobbes's state of nature, the life of every individual is precarious, and even the weak can overpower the strong through cunning or sheer chance. Thus, Hobbes's philosophy refutes the simplistic idea that strength alone determines survival, instead emphasizing the complex dynamics of fear, aggression, and the drive for self-preservation. Quote 127. The state is identical with the guarantee of the greatest possible prosperity for the greatest possible number of its citizens. Horkheimer describes Hobbes's view of the state's role as one that seeks to ensure the highest level of prosperity for its citizens. This concept aligns with the idea that the state's legitimacy hinges on its ability to provide safety, stability, and welfare for all. However, Horkheimer also indicates that when the state fails to fulfill this role, it often resorts to using power and ideology to maintain control, revealing the tension between the ideal of the state and its actual practices. Quote 128. For Hobbes, neither world history nor natural history, properly understood, should be confused with the actual science of politics. On the contrary, the latter is taken to be constructed out of pure thought. Horkheimer states that Hobbes saw politics as a domain of human invention, distinct from natural or historical processes. In Hobbes's view, the science of politics is a product of rational thought, based on an understanding of human nature. This abstract approach to politics separates it from the historical conditions and social relations that influence its real-world practice, underscoring Hobbes's focus on the individual's innate characteristics. Quote 129. The theoretical result of such a debate indiscriminately unites the two under a common concept and attributes to both either a common dignity or a common tragedy, and hence to that extent diverges from reality, goes beyond it. Horkheimer explains that philosophical debates about freedom often create a false equivalence between different social classes, attributing them with a universal dignity or tragedy. This abstraction ignores the concrete social differences and power relations that exist in reality, leading to conclusions that, while theoretically appealing, fail to address the material conditions of human life. Quote 130. Ideology becomes contrasted with reason. The latter, which Hobbes frequently calls right reason, is identical with science and natural law. It is the sum of all propositions based upon genuine insight. Horkheimer contrasts ideology with what Hobbes calls right reason, which is equated with scientific and natural law. For Hobbes, reason is the accumulation of true knowledge grounded in empirical evidence and logical thought. Ideology, on the other hand, represents the set of beliefs used to sustain social structures, often diverging from the objective truths revealed through reason. Quote 131. Hobbes and the Enlightenment produced the first modern philosophies of history that broached the problem of ideology, i.e., how the social situation relates to prevailing ideas that come to be recognized as false. Horkheimer acknowledges that Hobbes and Enlightenment thinkers were among the first to explore the relationship between society and the ideas that dominate it. They investigated how certain beliefs serve specific social interests and how these beliefs can be exposed as false. However, their analysis often reduced these beliefs to mere psychological traits, failing to fully grasp how ideology is rooted in the deeper structures of society. Quote 132. The utopians realized that profit was becoming the driving force of history in the burgeoning trade economy. Horkheimer explains that the utopians were among the first to notice the shift towards a profit-driven economy. They observed how burgeoning trade economies and the emergence of factories transformed the nature of production, concentrating power and wealth among a small group of educated and skilled entrepreneurs. This recognition of profit as the key motivator in society laid the groundwork for their critique of private property and social inequality. Quote 133. The utopians reacted to these new conditions with the cry, "Private property is at fault." The utopians, witnessing the rise of capitalism and the inequalities it produced, came to the conclusion that private property was the root cause of social evils. In contrast to the Middle Ages, where wealth was primarily for personal enjoyment, the new economic system linked power directly to the possession of means of production. As wealth became increasingly associated with control over others, the utopians identified private property as the source of conflict and suffering in society. Quote 134. For power was becoming decreasingly a matter of titles and inherited rights. It depended less and less on who ascended to the throne or who would be allowed to become a master of a trade. Horkheimer highlights a historical transition where power shifted from traditional titles and inherited rights to economic power. Control over production, wealth, and labor became the defining factors of power, reflecting a change in the social order. This shift led to new forms of domination based on ownership of the means of production, rather than nobility or trade guild privileges. Quote 135. The utopia of the Renaissance is the secularized heaven of the Middle Ages. Horkheimer draws a parallel between Renaissance utopias and the religious visions of the Middle Ages. While medieval utopias promised paradise after death, Renaissance utopias sought to create a perfect society on earth, reflecting the secularization of idealism. This shift represents the evolving aspirations of society, projecting hope for justice and equality into an earthly reality rather than a distant afterlife. Quote 136. A utopia leaps over time. It wants to generate a perfect society with means currently available. It is the dreamland of a historically bound fantasy. Horkheimer suggests that utopian thinking often ignores the complexities and historical processes necessary for change. Utopias attempt to construct a perfect society using existing means, without acknowledging the conditions and contradictions that shape reality. This leap over historical development reflects a desire to overcome present suffering, yet fails to engage with the deeper forces that maintain the status quo. Quote 137. The utopians share with Hobbes a detachment from actual historical circumstances. Horkheimer notes that both the utopians and Hobbes approached societal issues with a level of abstraction, failing to fully account for historical context. Utopians imagined an ideal society based on human rationality, while Hobbes constructed his social contract theory by isolating human behavior from historical conditions. This detachment reveals a common flaw, overlooking the material and social conditions that shape human nature and society. Quote 138. The comparison with the sick body of society which must be saved, even if it hurts in certain places, overlooks the minor detail that these particular places consist of living human beings. Horkheimer criticizes the idea of sacrificing individuals for the sake of societal progress, a view often held by proponents of historical development. By comparing society to a body that must endure pain to heal, thinkers disregard the suffering of individuals. Horkheimer emphasizes that real human lives, with their unique experiences and pain, are not mere expendable elements in the grand scheme of history. Quote 139. Utopias actually have two aspects: the critique of what is and the representation of what should be. Horkheimer identifies the dual nature of utopias. They serve both as a critique of existing societal flaws and as a vision of an ideal future. While they highlight the deficiencies and injustices of the current social order, they also propose an alternative, often idealistic, path forward. This dual function provides utopias with a revolutionary potential, even if their practical realization remains fraught with challenges. Quote 140. Vico calls Providence sovereign over the affairs of men, and when he says that his new science must therefore be a demonstration, so to speak, of what Providence has wrought in history. Horkheimer refers to Vico's belief that divine providence guides human history, shaping its course through human actions. Vico's idea of providence suggests that, despite individuals acting on their interests and instincts, there exists an underlying, often hidden order that directs societal evolution. This perspective attempts to reconcile the chaotic nature of history with a broader, purposeful trajectory. Quote 141. Vico's doctrine of recurrence consists in a simple belief in the repetition of things human. Horkheimer summarizes Vico's idea that history is characterized by recurring patterns. According to Vico, societies go through cycles of growth, maturity, decline, and a return to barbarism. This cyclical view challenges linear progress narratives, suggesting that humanity's struggles and achievements are bound to repeat, shaped by underlying social and material conditions. Quote 142. Bourgeois society does not rely upon conscious collaboration for the existence and happiness of its members. Horkheimer argues that bourgeois society is not built on the idea of collective, conscious cooperation to achieve the well-being of its people. Instead, it operates on self-interest and competition, where individuals must fend for their survival. The market dictates production and exchange, often leading to societal development that is marked by great losses in human lives and goods. This structure not only fosters economic disparity, but also ingrains a sense of alienation and coldness within the individual, shaping their relationship with others as mere transactions. Quote 143. The bourgeois leader is just the magnified version of this type. His character structure corresponds to that of his followers. Horkheimer suggests that the characteristics seen in bourgeois leaders are merely amplified versions of the qualities present in the average bourgeois individual. This includes a mixture of conflicting traits such as compassion, strictness, modesty, and pride. These leaders often project a combination of moral severity and fantastical behavior that resonates with their followers, reflecting the contradictions within the larger society they represent? Quote 144. Nothing in the essence of the bourgeois individual opposes the repression and annihilation of one's fellow human beings. Horkheimer highlights the inherent cruelty within the bourgeois individual, shaped by the competitive nature of capitalist society. The pursuit of personal gain and the indifference to the suffering of others are seen as normal in this context. As people are reduced to competitors, the annihilation of others for self-advancement becomes acceptable, revealing the destructive aspects of a society based on egoism and market-driven relationships. Quote 145. The bourgeoisie's struggle against atheism is less indicative of wisdom as a whole than of the wisdom of the government. Horkheimer critiques the bourgeois class's use of religion as a tool for maintaining control. The fight against atheism is not so much about an authentic pursuit of wisdom, but rather a strategic move by the ruling class to foster a sense of order. Religion serves as a means to uphold the social structure, providing a unifying force that compensates for the lack of genuine common interest in society. Quote 146. Coldness and alienness are the direct result of this basic structure of the epoch. Nothing in the essence of the bourgeois individual opposes the repression and annihilation of one's fellow human beings. Horkheimer elaborates on the emotional coldness prevalent in bourgeois society. The social system encourages individuals to view each other as competitors, leading to a pervasive sense of alienation. This mentality promotes an acceptance of repression and violence as individuals focus solely on their survival and self-interest. The societal structure, thus, becomes marked by a profound indifference toward the well-being of others. Quote 147. The masses are incorporated into a new phase of class society. Horkheimer argues that revolutionary movements, despite their promises of freedom and justice, often end up integrating the masses into a new form of class society. Leaders use symbols, speeches, and grand concepts to mobilize the masses, but the outcome typically involves a transition to a different phase of class-based control. The revolutionary energy gets redirected into preserving a new order rather than realizing a truly liberated society. Quote 148. In salient historical moments, this bourgeois nihilism is expressed in the specific form of terror. Horkheimer points out that the nihilistic tendencies of bourgeois society manifest in extreme forms during critical historical periods, particularly through terror. During revolutions, acts of cruelty and violence serve to reaffirm the society's fundamental contempt for individual existence. This terror often targets symbols of excess or pleasure, embodying the bourgeois moral disdain for luxury and reinforcing the underlying nihilism of the era. Quote 149. The overcoming of this morality lies not in the positing of a better one, but in the creation of conditions under which their reason for existing is eliminated. Horkheimer suggests that the key to overcoming bourgeois morality, with its contradictions and cruelty, is not merely to propose a more ethical system. Instead, it requires transforming the material conditions that give rise to such morality. Only through creating a society where the basis for the oppressive morality is removed can a truly humane and dignified existence be achieved. Quote 150. When the will to cause suffering ceases to act in the name of God, in the name of justice, morality, honor, or the nation, it loses, by means of insight into itself, the terrible power it exercises so long as it conceals itself from its own carrier on the basis of ideological denial. Horkheimer argues that acts of cruelty gain their power from being justified through ideological constructs such as religion, justice, or national pride. When individuals recognize and confront their own impulses toward aggression without cloaking them in these ideals, those impulses lose their grip. The acknowledgement and rational understanding of such drives prevent them from becoming forces of cultural and social destruction. Quote 151. The humanism that pervades the history of the New Spirit shows a double face. Horkheimer critiques the nature of humanism in bourgeois society, arguing that it contains a fundamental contradiction. While humanism celebrates human dignity and self-determination in practice, it often leads to self-abasement and the glorification of a select few. The idealization of abstract human values contrasts sharply with the everyday reality of exploitation and suffering, creating a duality that shapes the psyche of the masses. In Between Philosophy and Social Science, Max Horkheimer articulates a vision of social philosophy that transcends the boundaries of pure theory, arguing for a dialectical approach that integrates empirical research with philosophical reflection to address the complexities of human life under capitalism. The essays emphasize the need for a social science that does not merely observe society, but actively seeks to understand and challenge the structures that inhibit human freedom and justice. By examining the roles of ideology, morality, and individual psychology within the framework of social structures, Horkheimer underscores the importance of critical thought in fostering a more just and equitable society. His early writings capture the essence of critical theory as a dynamic interdisciplinary field committed to analyzing and transforming social conditions, leaving readers with a profound sense of philosophy's potential to engage with and reshape the realities of modern life.
Curious to dive into the mind of Max Horkheimer? With StudyLab Pro's Book GPT, it's possible. Ask questions, explore themes, and discover the depths of Between Philosophy and Social Science, Selected Early Writings, in an entirely new way. Start your conversation now by clicking on our logo. And if you're hungry for more educational content, subscribe to our channel to keep discovering, learning, and growing. Want more than just videos? Click on our logo now to join us on our platform for multiple choice tests, in-depth content, and tools to help you ace your studies. Get started now.